On the evening of May 19, 1931, rain washed over the narrow streets of Lower Manhattan. The city was alive with the sound of streetcars, taxi horns, and distant jazz drifting from hidden clubs. To everyone outside, it looked like another ordinary night in New York. But inside a quiet apartment several floors above the street, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The curtains were pulled shut. The lights were dim. Every man entering the room had been searched for weapons. Nobody arrived with bodyguards. Nobody used real names. One by one, some of the most powerful gangsters in America took their seats around a plain wooden table. They barely spoke. Cigarette smoke slowly filled the room as each man waited for someone else to break the silence. They weren't there to celebrate. They weren't there to negotiate peace. They were there because the old rules of the mafia were beginning to collapse. For years, New York's underworld had been controlled by aging bosses who believed tradition was more important than profit. They refused to work with outsiders. They demanded absolute loyalty, and anyone who questioned their authority usually disappeared without a trace. But a younger generation was growing impatient. They saw opportunity where the old bosses saw danger. They believed the future of organized crime wasn't about family honor. It was about money. Millions of dollars were flowing through bootlegging, gambling, labor unions, and protection rackets. The Great Depression had pushed desperate people toward illegal businesses, and the mafia was becoming richer than ever before. The only problem: there wasn't enough room at the top. Every new alliance threatened an old friendship. Every secret deal created another enemy. And every handshake carried the possibility of betrayal. The men gathered in that apartment understood something few others did. If they failed to agree tonight, New York wouldn't simply experience another gang dispute. It would become a battlefield. Within months, some of the city's most feared mafia bosses would be hunted through restaurants, hotel lobbies, and crowded streets. Trusted friends would become assassins. Entire crime families would change sides overnight. The balance of power that had ruled New York for decades would be shattered forever. History would remember the bloodshed, but almost nobody would remember the meeting that quietly set everything in motion. Because what happened behind those closed doors wasn't just another mafia conversation. It was the beginning of one of the bloodiest power struggles New York had ever seen. And the men who believed they were planning the future had no idea that some of them had already signed their own death warrants. Long before New York became the center of America's mafia empire, its streets belonged to men who believed fear was stronger than law. In the crowded neighborhoods of Little Italy, respect wasn't earned in courtrooms or city halls. It was earned in back alleys, gambling rooms, and smoke-filled cafes where a man's word could mean life or death. Among the ambitious young criminals growing up in that world was Charles "Lucky" Luciano. He wasn't born Charles Luciano. He entered the world in Sicily in 1897 as Salvatore Lucania. Like millions of other immigrants, his family crossed the Atlantic searching for a better future. Instead, they found poverty in New York's Lower East Side. The neighborhood was loud, crowded, and unforgiving. Children learned early that survival depended on strength. Luciano learned something even more valuable. Power didn't always belong to the toughest man. Sometimes it belonged to the smartest. As a teenager, he discovered he could make money by offering protection to younger children on their way to school. Those who paid were left alone. Those who refused often regretted it. It was a simple racket, but it revealed something about his personality. He wasn't driven by anger. He was driven by opportunity. Unlike many street criminals, Luciano rarely allowed emotion to control his decisions. He watched people carefully. He studied their weaknesses. He learned who could be trusted and who could be manipulated. Those lessons would shape the rest of his life. Around the same time, another young man was making a name for himself in Brooklyn. His name was Vito Genovese. Genovese was different. Where Luciano preferred patience, Genovese relied on intimidation. He had a quick temper and little sympathy for anyone who stood in his way. Violence came naturally to him, and people noticed. Despite their differences, the two men respected each other. Luciano saw Genovese as someone willing to do what others hesitated to do. Genovese saw Luciano as a strategist with bigger ambitions than the average neighborhood gangster. Together, They represented a new generation of criminals, one that believed the old mafia traditions were becoming obstacles instead of strengths. Then came Prohibition. When the United States banned the sale of alcohol in 1920, politicians celebrated what they believed was a moral victory. The mafia saw something else, a fortune. Within months, illegal liquor was flowing through New York faster than ever. Speakeasies appeared behind barbershops, restaurants, and warehouses. Every shipment of whiskey meant thousands of dollars in profit. Luciano understood that bootlegging wasn't just another crime. It was an industry. He built connections with truck drivers, corrupt police officers, dock workers, and suppliers willing to look the other way for the right price. Money poured in, but money also attracted dangerous rivals. At the top of New York's underworld stood two powerful bosses, Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Both men believed they deserved complete control over the city's criminal empire. Both demanded absolute loyalty, and both viewed compromise as weakness. Their followers admired them. Their enemies feared them. Luciano worked under Masseria, learning how the old system operated from the inside. At first, the arrangement seemed beneficial. Masseria possessed influence, loyal soldiers, and political connections that stretched across the city. But the longer Luciano watched him, the more frustrated he became. The old boss refused to adapt. He trusted only Sicilian-born gangsters. He rejected partnerships with Jewish and Irish criminals, even when they offered enormous profits. To Luciano, that wasn't wisdom. It was bad business. He had already formed close relationships with men outside the traditional mafia structure, including Meyer Lansky, a brilliant financial thinker, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, whose reputation for fearless violence made him one of the most dangerous young gangsters in America. Together, they represented something revolutionary, a criminal network built on profit instead of birthplace. To the older bosses, that idea bordered on betrayal. To Luciano, it was the future. As the years passed, the tension between the old guard and the younger generation grew stronger. Every business deal became an argument. Every disagreement created new enemies. Behind closed doors, whispers spread through the underworld. Some said Masseria had become too stubborn. Others believed Maranzano wanted absolute control over every family in New York. No one trusted anyone completely anymore. Every dinner meeting carried hidden motives. Every handshake concealed suspicion. Luciano found himself trapped between two worlds. On one side stood tradition, on the other stood ambition. Choosing either path meant making powerful enemies. The pressure only increased when the rivalry between Masseria and Maranzano erupted into open conflict. Gunmen began appearing on busy streets. Businesses were burned. Trusted associates disappeared overnight. The newspapers called it gang warfare. Those inside the mafia knew it by another name, the Castellammarese War. It wasn't simply a fight over territory. It was a battle over the future of organized crime itself. Luciano tried to stay alive while quietly studying both sides. Every assassination taught him something. Every betrayal confirmed a belief he had carried for years. The old system was destroying itself. If nothing changed, everyone would lose. But changing that system would require an act so dangerous that almost no one would dare consider it. It would mean betraying the very boss who had helped him rise. It would mean gambling his own life on a plan that could either reshape the American Mafia forever or end with his body lying on a New York sidewalk. And somewhere in the shadows, a secret conversation was already being planned. A meeting that would transform suspicion into conspiracy. A meeting that would light the fuse of New York's bloodiest mafia war. By the spring of 1931, New York no longer felt like a city at peace. The streets were crowded as always. Wall Street struggled through the Great Depression. Thousands of ordinary people searched for work every morning. Restaurants stayed open. Nightclubs played music until dawn. But beneath the city's normal rhythm, another war was unfolding. Every powerful gangster knew it. Every corrupt police officer sensed it. Every bootlegger wondered if he would be next. The Castellammarese War had turned New York into a battlefield where trust disappeared almost as quickly as life itself. Joe Masseria believed victory was only a matter of time. He still controlled one of the city's largest criminal organizations. His soldiers were loyal. His reputation frightened rivals. Most importantly, He believed Charles Luciano would remain faithful to him. That was his biggest mistake. Luciano had spent years watching the old boss make the same decisions over and over again. More violence, more revenge, more blood. Every assassination created another enemy. Every victory demanded another battle. Instead of building a stronger empire, Masseria was slowly exhausting his own organization. Luciano saw something his boss refused to see. The war had become bad for business. Bootlegging profits were shrinking. Gambling operations were constantly interrupted. Businesses forced to pay protection money were beginning to panic. Even loyal soldiers feared walking the streets after dark. Nobody was getting rich anymore. Everyone was simply trying to stay alive. Meanwhile, another powerful figure was waiting for the perfect opportunity. Salvatore Maranzano. Unlike Masseria, Maranzano preferred patience over emotion. He carefully expanded his influence while allowing his rival to waste men and money. To many observers, he appeared calm, but behind closed doors he had his own dream. He wanted complete control of the American Mafia. Not shared authority, not partnership, absolute power. Luciano understood that neither old boss would ever compromise. As long as both remain alive, the war would never end. So he began having conversations that very few people knew about. Some took place in quiet restaurants. Others happened inside apartments with covered windows. Sometimes they met while driving through the city to avoid being overheard. Only a handful of trusted men were invited. Among them was Meyer Lansky. Unlike many mafia leaders, Lansky rarely solved problems with emotion. He solved them with numbers. He calculated profits. He measured risks. And he believed Luciano's vision made perfect sense. The old generation treated organized crime like a medieval kingdom. Luciano wanted to run it like a corporation. Lansky knew that if the endless war continued, everyone would lose millions of dollars. There was another ally as well, Vito Genovese. Genovese had remained fiercely loyal to Luciano through years of violence. While Luciano built alliances, Genovese handled problems that required intimidation. He understood the language of fear better than almost anyone. Together, these men quietly discussed an idea that would have been considered unthinkable only months earlier. If the war couldn't be stopped, the bosses themselves had to disappear. It wasn't simply murder. It was revolution. Killing a mafia boss violated one of the oldest unwritten rules in organized crime. A boss represented authority. Removing him without permission threatened the entire structure. But Luciano believed the structure itself had become the problem. The question wasn't whether Masseria deserved to die. The question was whether the future was worth the risk. Eventually, the secret discussions led to a decision. Luciano would arrange a meeting with Masseria. Nothing unusual. Just lunch, cards, conversation. The old boss would suspect nothing. On April 15th, 1931, Luciano and Masseria met inside the Nuova Villa Tamaro restaurant on Coney Island. The atmosphere felt relaxed. Food was served. Wine was poured. The two men reportedly spent time playing cards together. For a moment, it looked like business as usual. Then Luciano excused himself. He claimed he needed to use the restroom. It was such an ordinary excuse that Masseria barely looked up from the table. Seconds later, the restaurant doors opened. Gunmen rushed inside. Bullets shattered the silence. Customers screamed. Chairs crashed across the floor. Within moments, Joe Masseria lay dead beside the card table. By the time police arrived, Luciano was gone. Officially, he had stepped away just before the shooting. Unofficially, many investigators believed it was no coincidence. Inside the underworld, almost everyone understood what had happened. Luciano had crossed a line from which there was no return. The man who had once served Masseria had now helped eliminate him. But instead of ending the crisis, the assassination created an even greater one. Salvatore Maranzano emerged as the apparent winner. Without Masseria standing in his way, he quickly declared himself the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses. For a brief moment, it appeared that peace had finally arrived. The gunfire slowed. Meetings resumed. Businesses reopened. Many gangsters believed the nightmare was finally over. Luciano wasn't convinced. He watched Maranzano closely. The new boss spoke about unity. He promised stability. He rewarded loyal supporters with powerful positions. But beneath those promises, Luciano noticed something familiar. Maranzano wasn't creating a new system. He was rebuilding the old one. Titles, hierarchy, absolute authority. It was Masseria all over again, only with a different face. Luciano had risked everything to end one dictatorship. He wasn't willing to live under another. Then whispers began reaching his closest allies. Trusted informants claimed Maranzano had started compiling a secret list. Names of men considered dangerous. Names of men who might one day challenge his authority. One name reportedly appeared near the top. Charles Luciano. Whether the rumors were completely true hardly mattered. In the Mafia, perception could be just as deadly as reality. Luciano knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Maranzano struck first, he would never get a second chance. The secret meeting that had once promised a new future had now created an even more dangerous game. The war wasn't over. It had simply changed sides. And the next move would determine who ruled New York's underworld, and who would be carried out in a coffin. Charles Luciano had defeated one boss. Now he faced another. From the outside, New York looked calmer than it had in months. The gunfire that had echoed through the streets during the Castellammarese War had slowed. Newspapers reported fewer gangland murders. Business owners cautiously reopened businesses that had been caught in the crossfire. It looked like peace, but inside the Mafia, everyone knew peace built on fear never lasted. Salvatore Maranzano had declared himself the undisputed leader of organized crime in America. He embraced the ancient Sicilian tradition of absolute authority, giving himself the title of boss of all bosses. Every crime family was expected to recognize his power. Every major decision flowed through him. For some, that sounded like stability. For Luciano, it sounded like history repeating itself. He had helped remove Joe Masseria because he believed the old Mafia system was holding everyone back. Now another aging boss was trying to rebuild the very structure Luciano wanted to destroy. The difference was that Maranzano had learned from the war. He trusted almost no one. He surrounded himself with loyal bodyguards. He carefully watched every conversation. And according to several accounts from men inside organized crime, he became increasingly suspicious of Luciano's growing influence. Rumors spread through the underworld like wildfire. Maranzano believed Luciano had become too powerful, too popular, too ambitious. Some whispered that the new boss had quietly ordered Luciano's execution. Others claimed a list of future targets had already been prepared. Whether every detail was true didn't matter. In the Mafia, waiting for proof often meant waiting too long. Luciano refused to gamble with his life. Instead of hiding, he made a decision that would permanently change the American Mafia. He would strike first. Unlike the chaotic violence that had filled New York only months earlier, this operation was carefully planned. Luciano and his closest allies knew Maranzano expected an attack from rival gangsters. He wasn't expecting visitors who looked like government officials. On September 10, 1931, several men arrived at Maranzano's Midtown Manhattan office posing as federal agents. The disguise worked perfectly. The bodyguards hesitated. No one wanted to interfere with what appeared to be an official government inspection. Within moments, the visitors were inside. The office door closed. Then everything changed. Maranzano was overwhelmed before he had time to organize a defense. He was stabbed and shot, ending his brief reign as the self-proclaimed boss of all bosses. The man who believed he had united the Mafia had ruled for only a few months. His empire collapsed in minutes. Word spread across New York faster than anyone expected. Gangsters rushed to verify the rumors. Phone lines lit up. Secret meetings began before sunset. Everyone asked the same question: who was in charge now? The answer surprised almost everyone. Luciano didn't claim Maranzano's title. In fact, he did the opposite. He abolished it. Instead of placing one man above everyone else,